Hello, welcome to this little video where I'll be talking through assignment 704, developing organizational strategy and assessment criteria 1.2. So this assessment criteria asks us to critically appraise approaches for the development of strategy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through two. But I need to critically appraise these approaches, so that means I need systematic process used to identify the strengths and weaknesses of information in order to assess its usefulness and validity. So I'm going to talk through two different approaches and look at the strengths and weaknesses of both. As ever, the assignment will ask you to talk about what happens in your organization to make some judgments about that. So the first way or approach to developing organizational strategy, I guess, might be called the autocratic approach or the top-down approach to strategy. So here, again, think traditional organizations where you have boardrooms filled with executives who set the strategy. So strategy set by the executives, and then the kind of the execution of it, the operational work, is then cascaded, often quite one way down through the organization. You know, people are given their orders and their directives, and the work actually happens kind of on the front line. And of course, the front line may be some way removed from that group of executives who do that sort of planning and decision making work. So I think probably, think sort of traditionally how the more traditional kind of corporates have worked, certainly in the 20th century, and some possibly still today. In extremis, you have the strategy may come from one person, one mind. You know, if you've got an exceptionally powerful executive, the Jack Welch in General Electric type, a real visionary, who might not necessarily be overly collaborative. You might actually have a strategy for a large organization actually emanate from the mind of just one person, and everybody else is there. Their role really is to facilitate and execute that plan. So that, I think, again, it still might happen in a few circumstances. You might think of examples, where you have, you know, individuals who have a very clear vision and everybody else does the work. I wonder whether, Elon Musk and Tesla and SpaceX and all that sort of stuff. I mean, he is an extraordinarily different thinker, and I think he's recognized that himself. I'm not sure whether he's a collaborator or whether actually, in Elon Musk's enterprise, the strategic work actually kind of happens in his own mind. So I guess that could be an autocratic approach to strategy. I could be wrong about that, actually. If you know any more about it, it could well be that actually he's more collaborative than that. So, but anyway, it would be potentially one to talk about. So when we critically assess this, so the strengths, well, it creates clarity and certainty around the work that people do. If people will often actually respond quite well to being given clear goals to achieve. So high sense of certainty, we quite like that. It's reassuring. We know what it is that we're aiming for. It may be that strategy is being defined by the most experienced people in the organization. So actually, if we've got a really effective leadership team that have been fairly and effectively selected, and we've just got an absolutely brilliant group of execs in the board, it might be that actually they are, if they're brilliant, talented, experienced people, that they are best placed to create the vision and the plan for the organization. That definitely can happen. But I wonder whether the examples of that are actually quite hard to lay fingers on. It's, as ever with teams, there's the good and the bad usually. Anyway, but in theory, it could work very well if people value a high sense of clarity and certainty. Weaknesses, it can limit engagement. It is quite directive, so people are essentially being told what to do. This is, potentially more of a one-way flow of communication. There may be minimal opportunity for input from employees on the front line. Leaders at the top may be quite detached from the immediate realities of working with customers or in frontline situations. There can be really quite a bit of a reality gap, and the people who actually work with customers or patients or essentially whatever it is the organization is there to do, the clients, whatever the client might be, may have a different view to people who work in headquarters or in corporate environments that could be quite detached from those realities. So it's not unheard of for executives to come up with directives and ideas which actually, when they then hit people on the front line, have minimal impact because people see those directives as being uninformed or not realistic or not even possible to deliver. So um, and that can be very disengaging. It's that one-way flow of information. It creates certainty, but it does limit opportunities for interaction. People do like certainty, but they also like autonomy. People like to have some control of what they do. So um, maybe this perhaps limits the control that people feel they have over their work. Oh no, this is interesting. So when you look at, if you like, strategic frameworks that were developed, this Kotter's 8 steps from the 80s, I believe, of a time when I think that more traditional way of strategy was probably the done thing, more normal. What strikes me about these frameworks is that they are quite autocratic in nature. So, there's quite a lot of power innate within something like Kotter's 8 steps, where you have your powerful coalition, you create a vision for change. All of that kind of happens at the top of the organization, and then the communication, empowerment, and actual work that's done is done lower in the organization. So, Kotter's 8 steps, although it's a fine framework for planning for change, particularly complex change, it assumes an autocratic culture, that ultimately it is up to the people at the top to work out the change and then make it happen within the organization in a strategic way. It doesn't particularly support kind of a two-way dialogue around around the development of the change itself. So yeah, so I think just an interesting snapshot really that of kind of, I mean, and I'm not sure what Cotter would say now, in today's world, whether he might adapt this a little bit. Maybe he already has, and I haven't seen it, but yeah, so it kind of implies an autocratic context there. The other approach is an emergent strategy. So here we have organizational solutions and methods that take shape through experimentation, response to the environment, and learning. Potentially could be driven by people at any level, and sometimes it can organizational will deliberately incentivize that if they're kind of really looking for people to come up with interesting ideas or solutions at any level. That's a different way of working. And it's rather than being predefined by executives in the boardroom, the strategy kind of emerges. Well, emergent strategy, of course it does, but it sort of takes shapes through experience. So the organization engages, you take your team, you engage with a problem or a client in the world, and you learn from that, you test out ideas, and then you find out what works, and your method or your strategy evolves and develops over time. The key to that is that if the client changes, the context changes, or the problem, the nature of, if you like, the problem that you're solving shifts or changes, or new technologies come on board and that type of thing, then the organization is kind of designed to work with that change, innovation, or disruption. Whereas when you're a more traditional organization, that strategy, say the 3-year plan or the 5-year plan, might be much harder to adapt when change happens. So this is just a kind of it's just a different philosophy and leading to a kind of a really a very different way of working. So in terms of strengths, it enables creativity and may lead to the development of significant new value when it works. So when you do get brilliant ideas coming from your gifted creative people, if you are able to bring those ideas into reality, and if you're first, that can be staggering new value. I think is it Siri was the first of the kind of apps that kind of like the virtual assistant, and a lot of work and experimentation went into that, but it did well for, I could be wrong here, I think Apple, I could be wrong, but I think it was, tremendously successful for them because it was the first, and then all the others obviously follow. But when you're first, there's a real opportunity win there. It can support high levels of engagement and commitment because people are generally encouraged to innovate, and that can be very very fulfilling if you value that in your work. And it allows the organization to be highly agile. So it's kind of an inbuilt way of working so that your structures and your ways of working can be responsive to opportunity and change. Weaknesses, yeah, so creativity can come at a cost of certainty and structure. It can feel quite chaotic working in this sort of environment. Can do, not always, that can be mitigated by being quite data driven and, scientific, actually. So There is a middle path here. It may need the culture to have a high risk tolerance and a commitment to experimentation. Yes, so there will be many ideas that might not work, or that you test them and you find out that the results weren't what you expected or anticipated. So the ideas get culled. Um, which can be quite expensive, really. Now, of course, when you do land on a good one and you create that innovation and you realize it into the world, and first, that can be phenomenally good. But on the path to get to that, it's likely that there will be a number of false starts and less positive outcomes. Quite expensive to do. I just look at Dyson, and no one bought the washing machine, So it's great if in I would say, again, technology innovation, these sorts, in sort of industries where experimentation is possible and there's a real win, real significant win when you're first with innovation. There may be other industries, I guess manufacturing and well, certain forms of complex manufacturing and that sort of thing, where that level of experimentation and what just it just isn't practical to do. That if you're creating complex components and that sort of thing, that you need longer term plans really for it to work. And so actually, this, although it sounds great, and it is definitely engaging, it just might not be suitable for all contexts and environments. So where high levels of structure and certainty are required, I guess, where there's high levels of regulation as well. So I suppose if you're thinking about things like medical technologies and that sort of thing, or medical solutions that are highly tested and regulated, that might limit the potential to apply this more agile strategy. So, I mean, I've left this a blank actually, because I think, again, this is something for you to think about as well. I mean, I suppose the conclusion I've come to, against these two different approaches for developing strategy is actually they both have their place. It's context dependent. I think, in the modern world of work, you've got to take into account as well the workforce expectations and that type of thing. And I think that there is increasingly in the Gen Zers, millennials and Gen Zers, more of an expectation that people will have a degree of input and autonomy. They're going to be less inclined to want to stay in organizations where they're told what to do or given essentially, just told to follow instructions or plans. So I think I can see how when you look at the desire of the workforce and what engages people, if you want to hold on to really good people, that kind of maximizing opportunities to get involved, to create and to influence strategy could be really quite important as part of an engagement approach. But it really does come down to the nature of the work that you do, and actually, if again, large infrastructure projects, all that sort of stuff that require years of consistent work over time, it might be completely impractical to be highly innovative and creative. It might be actually a much better way of working to have clear plans drawn up by experienced professionals who know what they're doing, and then work kind of cascaded and delegated down to operational people who deliver it. So I definitely don't want to rule out the need for a more kind of top-down autocratic approach to strategy when the situational context demands it. But at the same time, increasingly agile is very popular. We're starting to see it everywhere. But although it is great, and the agile methodology is now in all sorts of different aspects of work. It started out, I think, where agile was first associated with was software development and that sort of thing. It started to kind of creep into all sorts of aspects of work. But I just think it's worth remembering that this works really well when we are in a fast-paced, competitive environment where innovation is what we do. Agile is absolutely fantastic, but not all organizations or types of work relate to that. Some are much more about structure and consistency. So there we go. That's just my little bit of critical analysis, really. So over to you. How does your organization approach the development of strategy, and how effective is this approach, taking into account the nature of work, the context, the needs of your workforce, what colleagues say, and when people join your industry, what is it they look for? Does the method and the approach suit that? What's the effect on your culture? All great things to discuss. So there we go. That's it. A bit waffly, that one, but I guess it's one of those slightly more philosophical questions, I suppose, really, hopefully that's given you the gist and that you've got something to work with. Thank you very much indeed. I look forward to the next video.